Part 38. The emperor wants to send concubine Wen into the cold palace as bait. He was busy coming to the heart cultivation palace. As soon as he arrived at the door, he saw Xiao Beiji standing there with a sad face, and when he saw him, to open fire stepped forward with a smile and said, "Concubine Wen is here? Hurry up and get in. The emperor has been waiting for you for a while." Pu Qiutai nodded, and was about to enter the house, when he heard Xiao Beiji ask with concern, "Mother went to Sinning Palace, okay?" "Well, it's fine," Pu Qiutai replied, and then listened to Xiao Beiji whisper, "Although the old lady of the Queen Mother doesn't care about the affairs of the palace, she has always been not rubbing sand in her eyes. I also hope that the mother will look at these favors and think twice about everything." "What do you mean?" Pu Qiutai was keenly aware that there seemed to be some meaning in these words, and couldn't help but stop, but saw Xiao Beiji with a bitter face and said, "It's not interesting, mother." "Oh, that. Just go in and find out." He knew that there was nothing to ask here. But Pu Qiutai had a bad premonition in his heart, so he was busy entering the house. Xiao Beiji didn't go in here, and paced back and forth outside and whispered, "I really don't understand what the emperor thinks. Why can't you come leisurely? You have to make such an earth-shattering noise. I don't know what to do this time. Surprise? It's a scare, right? I don't know if concubine Wen can hold it." After Pu Qiutai entered the house, he saw Xia Linxuan sitting behind the bookcase with a serious face, his brows furrowed tightly. And he didn't look like he was going to surprise himself. The ominous premonition in his heart couldn't help but become even stronger, and after saluting, he said in a deep voice, "The emperor-summoned minister came over. I don't know what happened." Xia Linxuan raised his head suddenly. He dared to be too engrossed just now. And he didn't even notice that Pu Qiutai was coming, and when he saw that handsome and fresh person in front of him, he couldn't help but show a big smile, but when he thought of his plan, his heart became heavy again, and even the smile on his face was a little reluctant. "Qiutai, I have great news for you." Xia Linxuan pretended to be relaxed and said. But he knew in his heart that this was definitely not good news for Pu Qiutai. Only in this way could he anger this flexible lover to the greatest extent. Otherwise it would not be easy to achieve his goal with his current forbearance because of protecting the two sisters and brothers. No jokes. Pu Qiutai breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. And sure enough, he fell into Xia Linxuan's trap, stood up and said indifferently, "His Royal Highness Crown Prince also said that the emperor wants to surprise his ministers. What is it? Just say it. If you still want to sell the crown, maybe the minister will go out and wait for a while. It's the same when the emperor finishes selling the crown and then comes in to listen. Your family has entered Beijing. Do you want to visit them?" Xia Linxuan looked at Pu Qiutai with a smile, and did not sell it, but threw out the news with ease, as casually as asking what to eat for dinner. However, when these words were heard in Pu Qiutai's ears, they were tantamount to a shock. He even suspected that he had misheard, so he took a step back, looked at Xia Linxuan suspiciously for a long time, and asked in a mutter, "Your Majesty." "Say what? Who entered Beijing?" "It's your family." Xia Linxuan smiled brightly, but that smile looked in Pu Qiutai's eyes, but it was like a demon's big mouth with a bloody basin. Holding the last glimmer of hope, he clenched his fists, and asked as if he had exhausted all his strength, "My family? Who entered Beijing? Is it two men?" "No. All your family members have gone to Beijing." Xia Linxuan smiled more and more proudly. "There is no family member of the concubine in the palace who is not in the capital. And of course Qiutai should not be an exception. How is it? I'm considerate, aren't I? Your parents are old, so taking care of the two elderly people on the road is a little slower, but fortunately, it is finally Pu Qiutai's body trembled, and he didn't listen to what Xia Linxuan said further, and it took a long time for him to finally open his trembling lips and mutter. How did they get into Beijing? I obviously told them that not going beyond one's bounds stayed in their hometown in Jiangnan. He didn't finish his speaking, then he saw Xia Linxuan open the drawer, take out a letter from it, stare at him and ask with a smile, "Qiutai said this letter? Unfortunately, this letter did not reach your family, but into my hands." Tisk, it's not that I'm laughing at you, you've always been a smart person, how could you do such a thing? If I want to use your family to coerce you, won't they be in the capital, and I can't do anything? Now that Qiutai is favored by the 6th palace, how should you not let your family stay in a corner of the south of the Jiangnan and continue to endure hardships? You should let them go to Beijing with their families and experience the emperor's grace with you. The letter. It's the letter. How could it be in the hands of the emperor? Pu Qiutai didn't dare to think deeply, he only felt that his head was buzzing, but Xia Linxuan's knife-like strong words were heard in his ears without missing a word. And he only felt that there was a burst of blackness in front of him, and Venus was popping up. If he had a weapon such as a sword on him at this time, he would not hesitate to rush forward and fight with Xia Linxuan. However, he didn't, so in the end, he could only pick up the square inkstone on the table and smash it at Xia Linxuan with all his strength. "Qiutai, what are you doing here? It's just an inkstone. How can Xia Linxuan's skills not be able to dodge?" Gently and skillfully dodged the murder weapon, but there was still unused ink in the inkstone, so it was dripping all the way, splashing on his head, face and clothes. "What else are you asking me for?" Pu Qiutai had been stimulated by this sudden bad news, and even the forbearance efforts of the past 2 years had been forgotten. His body stiffly searched for all the things that could smash people on the bookcase, and smashed it in the direction of Xia Linxuan, while shouting in a hoarse voice, "What am I doing? I'm going to fight with you. What else are you going to do? You've pushed me to this point. What more are you going to do? Why didn't even my family let go? Xia Linxuan, you bastard, you bastard. Am I a jerk? Qiutai, how can you be better than me? You have entered the palace to be sealed, you are already my concubine, but you still fantasize about letting your family stay in Jiangnan. You say that you will surrender to me, but your heart is still the same as before, you have never had the slightest affection for me. Otherwise, what are you writing this letter for? Why don't you have affection for me? You don't even have a trace of trust at all, and I poured out my heart and lungs for you, and in the end, I got such a result? You still dare to lose your temper now? Who do you think you are? You are just a concubine. Who gave you the power to make you so pampered and arrogant?" The sound of ping-pong smashing things was mixed with the angry shouting and scolding of the two. Xiao Beiji and several eunuchs and palace maids listened outside the door, all of them were pale and frightened. They don't know how long it took, but everyone saw Pu Qiutai rushing out of the door with anger on his face, staggering all the way away from the Heart Cultivation Palace, and heading in the direction of the Yunhai Palace. "Let's take a look." Xiao Beiji hurriedly gave an order to the 2 little eunuchs next to him, but he heard the 2 of them say, "Father-in-law, don't worry. Aren't the people from Yunhai Palace following? They are them, you are you. Follow and see how it goes, and then come back and report it." "How old are you? So lazy?" Xiao Beiji gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice, so the 2 lazy guys rushed out of the porch and chased the direction that Pu Qiutai left. Here Xiao Beiji stood outside for a while, and heard Xia Linxuan inside calling him in. He cautiously entered the door, but saw that the emperor was not as angry as he imagined. Sat behind the bookcase with a calm face, and when he saw him come in, he said indifferently, "Order someone to clean up here." When he stood up, his face was immediately filled with anger. Surprised by the master's face-changing arts, Xiao Beiji didn't wait to clean up his mood, and saw that Xia Linxuan had already gone out of the door. What the hell is going on? Xiao Beiji scratched his head, hurriedly followed out. If he cleaned up the heart cultivation palace, he didn't need to be instructed. Naturally, the palace maids and eunuchs would take over. So, he followed behind Xia Linxuan here, but he didn't want a guard of honor when he saw that the emperor didn't want to be a guard of honor. And he only followed him alone. Xiao Beiji was proud at the same time, but his heart became more and more bottomless. It's all arranged over there in the cold palace? All the way to the Wangchu pavilion in the Imperial Garden, the master and slave stood in the pavilion, taking in the surrounding scenery. And Xiao Beiji heard Xia Linxuan suddenly ask in a low voice. Huh? Yes. It's all arranged. Xiao Beiji came back to his senses and hurriedly replied. More than 2 months ago. Because a concubine who had entered the cold palace died mysteriously, Xia Linxuan asked him to take the opportunity to rectify and arrange a few reliable people in the cold palace. This is common sense, so Xiao Beiji didn't think much about it that day, and cautiously arranged for a few trustworthy people to go in. He has always known the filth of the cold palace. But as long as he doesn't go out of line, no one wants to care. But this time it's different. The concubine said that she died bizarrely, but in fact, because the palace maids and eunuchs under her couldn't stand her moodiness and abuse, so they quietly killed her. In the end, it was the concubine of the former emperor, and now she was murdered. So it is really impossible to say. In the end, the emperor personally asked, if this is not rectified, is it worthy of his title of the head of the inner house? At this time, he suddenly heard Xia Linxuan ask such an inexplicable sentence. After Xiao Beiji finished answering, his heart couldn't help jumping, looking at the master's face. A sentence was held in his throat. It was not uncomfortable to go up or down, but he never dared to ask. But seeing Xia Linxuan let out a sigh of relief, he nodded and said in a deep voice, "Tell me to go down and see who has been actively camping in the cold palace these days. Remember, you can't show a trace of this matter, otherwise I will only ask you." Yes. The slave knows. The sweat on Xiao Beiji's forehead was about to come down, but he didn't dare to reach out to wipe it, and there was only one thought in his mind. What is the emperor going to do? He wouldn't really want to send concubine Wen mother into the cold palace, right? Only, just because concubine Wen disobeyed him today? But this matter was also provoked by you. It wasn't for you to let the Pu family enter Beijing, and concubine Wen would not be so out of shape. Your Majesty, you are pressing to this point step by step. And you have to make concubine Wen mother swallow his anger. Isn't that a little too unreasonable? If I say that I want to send concubine Wen to the cold palace, what will you think? Xiao Beiji? Just as Xiao Beiji was muttering in his heart, he saw Xia Linxuan turn his head suddenly, staring at him with clear eyes, and asked in a deep voice. Being stared at by those eyes, Xiao Beiji instantly felt as if a mountain had been pressed on his back, and the sweat on his forehead finally pooled into a stream and flowed down his cheeks. His mouth was bitter. He didn't even have time to figure out Xia Linxuan's true intentions, so he blurted out, "Your Majesty, concubine Wen has always been generous and gentle. Although he is disrespectful to the emperor today, it's also a moment of anger, and it's not that the end of it, is it? Oh? You're saying I'm being too ruthless in doing this?" Xia Linxuan raised his eyebrows, and when he saw Xiao Beiji's body shrinking back, he said in a deep voice, "Tell me the truth. Otherwise you will be punished for the crime of bullying the king." Yes, it's a little ruthless. Xiao Beiji knelt down with a plop. He didn't know if he was crazy. Although Pu Qiutai had been favored by Xia Linxuan before, but he had no kindness to him, and he didn't need to risk angering the emperor to speak for him. But if he could not have watched that poor man of cold pride falls into such a place of no return. Perhaps it's just because the other party doesn't have the kind of contempt and disdain that other concubines hide in his gaze. Qiutai has no kindness to you, and you can still speak up. Tisk. I really have to marvel at his charm. It seems that in addition to my concubines, the other servants in the palace like him very much. And even the wild horse-like prince has put away his usual rebelliousness after arriving at him. Although cunning little means are still endless. Xia Linxuan seemed to say such a sentence with a smile. Xiao Beiji's mind was racing. And he secretly wondered if this sentence also hinted at the emperor's attitude towards concubine Wen. Before he could come up with a reason, he felt a slight blow on his leg. And then Xia Linxuan's voice sounded, "Get up, I didn't say that I was going to cut you. What are you doing with this, emperor sparing your life, posture?" Xiao Beiji breathed a sigh of relief. And quickly stood up, just as he wanted to say a few words with a smile to appease Xia Linxuan's rising anger, but he heard him say in a deep voice, "The queen's death has another inside story. Yes, yes, yes." Xiao Beiji's eyes widened for a moment, but he saw Xia Linxuan's face as dark as night, and he had served this master for more than 10 years, but at this time, he was also frightened by the anger that seemed to come out of his body, and after an exclamation, he didn't dare to ask more. "The harem has always been bloody, and I know it very well. It's just that she was so bold that she dared to murder the queen, and in the end she didn't show any traces, such a femme fatale, bare-hearted, leopard-hearted, and cunning woman like a fox is tantamount to a poisonous snake in the harem. If it was in the past, I might still be interested in having fun, but now Qiutai is isolated in the palace and has no help in the crisis, and I dare not take this risk, so I can only lure the snake out of the hole. Your Majesty. But I have to take concubine Wen as the for bait?" Xiao Beiji plucked up his courage and stammered to ask this sentence. Seeing Xia Linxuan nodding calmly, he couldn't help but blurt out, Isn't that an adventure? Your Majesty." Speaking of this, he came to his senses, quickly covered his mouth tightly, and then knelt down with a plop, and said with a sad face, "The emperor forgives the sin, the slave forgets his form for a while, it is really bold." "You know you're bold," Xia Linxuan scolded with a smile. "Get up, you kneel like this. And you're not afraid of breaking your knees. Tisk, you've been with me for all these years, just a little concentration, is it a shame?" "Yes, the slave is stupid, and this time will be. It's a gaffe." Xiao Beiji stood up with a bitter face, but listened to Xia Linxuan's serious words. Instead of preventing this invisible means of killing people every day, it may not be able to prevent it, but it is better to give the other party a great opportunity. This trick may seem risky, but as long as it is properly arranged, it can defeat the enemy in one move. Unless the other party can hold back. Xiao Beiji peeked at his master, and said cautiously for a long time, "Is the emperor already have doubts in your heart?" Xia Linxuan said lightly, "In my opinion, it is nothing more than concubine Luo and concubine Yan who are the most suspicious. After all, the queen is immortal, and the two of them are the most likely to benefit. It's just because of this that I guess they may not dare to be so bold. However, the previous incident was lost due to the passage of time, so I had to take a risk." Speaking of this, the young king's eyes were full of murderous intent, and he said, "No matter who this poisonous snake is, it is also her ability to make me so scheming." Xiao Beiji suddenly realized, stretched out his hand to wipe the sweat on his forehead, and secretly said, "Okay, I didn't scare me to death." It turned out that it was all a bitter trick staged by the emperor in order to lure the snake out of the hole. It's just that the will to let the Pu family enter Beijing was made as early as the autumn. Could it be that the emperor had already planned it at that time? At that time. It was the time when the queen died, and I understood. It seems that the queen learned the truth before she died, so she was unwilling to be murdered to death like this. So she told the emperor about it. If the emperor didn't care too much about the harem in the past, now that there is concubine Wen, then naturally everything is different. After figuring out this layer, Xiao Beiji had a good idea of what to do next, and seeing Xia Linxuan turn around and get out of the pavilion, he followed behind him and whispered, "Your Majesty, do you want to send concubine Wen to the cold palace immediately? Don't be busy, Qiutai's anger can't be reversed in a while. I will be patient to play with him for a few days. And then find an excuse to quarrel, and then send him into the cold palace, so that everyone will think that I can't bear it anymore and return to ruthlessness." Under the conviction, it is good to do things boldly with confidence. The emperor is wise. Xiao Beiji's words came from the bottom of his heart. It is said that the harem women are scheming. But the emperor doesn't want to get involved. If the emperor really wants to play with his heart, who can beat him? It's just that you can't say, "The emperor is cunning," right? This kind of truth is to be punished by God, so Xiao Beiji can only express his admiration with the cliché, "The emperor's wisdom," in the end. You just want to say that the emperor is cunning, right? Unexpectedly, Xia Linxuan saw through his mind at a glance, and immediately snorted coldly. "Okay, go back to the heart cultivation palace. What kind of expression should you use? I don't need to teach you, right?" No, the slave has been in the palace for so many years, how can he not even do this little thing? Xiao Beiji smiled doggedly, then thought about it carefully, and still changed the worried expression just now, and accompanied Xia Linxuan back to the heart cultivation palace. Good and dignified, how could the emperor be so angry? That's concubine Wen. Not noble way. In the Yin Yu Palace, concubine Luo Shu Ruo Lan listened to the turmoil in the heart cultivation palace reported by her henchman Ming Ruo, and couldn't help sneering. Then shook her head and said softly, "Are people all fools?" Ming Ruo whispered, "It is said that it is because concubine Wen's family was forced to enter Beijing by the emperor. So concubine Wen was so angry that he lost his demeanor." Before the words fell, I saw concubine Luo sit up straight suddenly, and it took a long time to squint her eyes and smile slightly. "This thing is interesting. You go out and inquire quietly to see what is going on. Now that he has been crowned a concubine, it is normal for his family to enter Beijing to accept the emperor's reward. Why did he suddenly make such a fuss?" Ming Ruo agreed, thought about it and said in a low voice, "When the slave came back just now, I happened to meet concubine Yan Mother. She smiled very proudly, and said that if you let Mother be fine, just ask her to gossip." "Oh? She's in such a good mood?" Shu Ruo Lan raised her eyebrows, thought about it and said with a smile, "Since I knew that the second prince was sent to the Yunhai Palace." She still felt out of breath after half a day's work, and she turned her anger into joy like this? If she wanted to know the news of the trouble in the heart cultivation palace, she shouldn't be so excited, unless she already knows the reason for this. But where did she come from to be so powerful? She's not much better than me, is she? Ming Ruo said with a smile. This may not be a matter of ears and eyes, how tight the mouths of those people in the heart cultivation palace are. Mother doesn't know, there is no reason why we can't pry it open. Concubine Yan Mother can pry it open. Perhaps this matter is the trick made by concubine Yan Mother, and now that this trap has finally worked, she naturally won't hesitate to think about it. It's too late to be happy. After saying this, Shu Ruolan nodded frequently, then stretched her waist and said with a smile, "She is so capable. It seems that I still underestimate her in the past few days. Speaking of which, it's a really useful knife. Anyway, now we are not in a hurry to join in the fun. Just to see how this thing will develop. No matter what, I think there are people who are more anxious to seize this opportunity than us." That's what the mother said. Ming Ruo echoed and said, "Let the slave and maid see that concubine Wen is so ignorant. The emperor may not have the patience to coax him all the time. Maybe this time, under the emperor's impatience, he will be finished. If that's the case, then concubine Yan mother has made a great contribution." Shu Ruolan smiled, glanced at Ming Ruo, nodded and said, "You're right, I won't rob her of such credit. I can't let her make more credits like this. Wouldn't it be good for us to reap the benefits? But when it's convenient, it's still appropriate to pick a little bit of convenience in an inconsequential place. After all, she's not stupid. How can she be willing to make knives for us?" Ming Ruo lowered her head and said softly, "Yes, the slave understands. Let's see how this thing develops."